With the dumpster fire known as 2020 now finally coming to a close, this year has seriously felt like 10. It's time to look back at the worst horror films that were released over the worst year ever. But before we do that, quick disclaimer, these are my opinions and my opinions only. If you enjoyed some of these films, I'm not saying that you can't. Right on if you dig them. So with all that said, let's get into the video. Coming in at number 10 is Dave Franco's directorial debut, The Rental. From a technical aspect, the film looks great, and the cast is also really fantastic, but otherwise, it's a poorly written script with characters I don't care about. The film was essentially a drama for most of the film, and the last 10 minutes were treated to some lackluster slasher light. It's like Dave Franco gets the idea of what a horror film is, but can't actually execute on making the film suspenseful. I honestly couldn't wait for our main characters to get killed off, and even when a character would get killed off, the kills were all off screen, uninventive, and one just made me laugh out loud. Coming in at number 9 is We Summon the Darkness. I really wanted to like this film. The film takes place in the 80s at the height of satanic panic, so there's these 3 killers that are basically taking advantage of that, and they go after these 3 best friends. Really cool concept, really cool idea, with a fun cast. In particular, Alexandria Daddario was a standout, but otherwise, the story feels like it has a major identity crisis. It tries to be too many things at once. If anything, I was wishing I was watching Satanic Panic instead of We Summon the Darkness. At number 8 is The Dare. This was like a cross between Saw 2 and Bereavement. This is probably one of the more forgettable films on this list. Richard Brake was cool, and some of the torture scenes were a little cringe-inducing, but otherwise, it's incredibly boring, and I am having the hardest time remembering anything about it. Coming in at number 7 is The Marshes. Yet again, another film with a lot of potential, a really cool idea, but poor execution. For the first hour, we're basically going through the motions of this drama between these 3 biologists, and it's only in about the last 30 minutes where we actually get the horror. And there's one particular scene that is gory, but the way that the film is shot, it's all done in shaky cam, so you can't even see the practical effects and the kills, which is so unfortunate because I feel like underneath it all, there's a really good film in here, but with an hour of padding and 30 minutes of horror that's mediocre, it ultimately leads to a film that I just cannot recommend. At number 6 is the Netflix original film, Ghost Stories. For an anthology film that touts itself as ghost stories, there's very little ghosts in this film, as well as very little horror. The best story in this anthology film is the 3rd story with the little kids, and there's like these zombie vampire things, but the 3 other stories are forgettable and boring. The final story nearly made me turn off the film because it was such a chore to get through. Rounding out the top 5 is Shifter. It has a cool concept of this time travel body horror film, but the execution is pretty awful. If anything, this should have been a short film. Adding insult to injury, the film has terrible CGI straight from the 1990s, wooden acting, and no narrative structure. This felt like a student film padded out to full length. Coming in at number 4 is The Grudge. I enjoyed the director's previous film, Piercing, so I was really excited to see his take on The Grudge. Then there's the great cast of Lin Shaye, Andrea Riseborough, and John Cho. On paper, this film should have worked, but unfortunately, the convoluted story and the poor pacing really bogged this film down. I wasn't a big fan of the telegraph scares and the jump scares, they just don't feel earned to me. The gore and the practical effects were really well done. I'd recommend watching Ju-on Origins on Netflix. It's a fantastic limited series that is truly frightening. Coming in at number 3 is Fantasy Island. So this is basically the film adaptation of the show from way back in the day. I remember very little about the show, but it was pretty cheesy. So I went into this film with very low expectations and went in with the mindset of this is just going to be dumb popcorn fun. The thing is, it wasn't fun. It was just mind-numbingly stupid. We have way too many characters and stories that we're following. None of them are very likable. The forced comedy is cringy. I lost an hour and a half of my life on this movie, and it made me so mad. Okay, maybe not mad, more annoyed. I was hoping for something stupid fun like The Bye Bye Man or Truth or Dare, but it's not even that kind of stupid fun. It's just stupid. Coming in at number 2 is The Dawn. I said this during my review, I hate ragging on indie films, and this is obviously a very low budget film, but no matter how low budget your movie is, there's no excuse for it being this dreadfully boring. Nothing really happens. We're just hanging out with a bunch of nuns walking down hallways. I mean, if you want to see what Stacey Dash has been up to, she's in this as a nun, so there's that. The story really didn't make a whole lot of sense. It seemed like our main character was possessed by something, but nothing is ever really explained. And the last 5 to 10 minutes of this film are hilariously bad. And the worst horror film of 2020 goes to The Murder of Nicole Brown Simpson. While this is more thriller than horror, there are definitely horror elements in this film, specifically a blatant ripoff from A Nightmare on Elm Street. This is directed by Daniel Farrands. If his name sounds familiar, it's because he also directed The Haunting of Sharon Tate, which came out in 2019, which also happened to be number 1 on my worst list for that year. I even predicted back in January when I reviewed this film that I could not see any film being worse than this film. And my god, was I right. This is somehow even more tasteless and disgusting than The Haunting of Sharon Tate. The most egregious example of that is the murder scene itself. Not only is it in slow motion and in great detail with a lot of gore, but Daniel Farrands thought it would be a good idea to also include actual photos from the crime scene. These aren't photos that are censored. You're seeing the real photos of them dead at the crime scene, and it lingers on these photos. That's where I feel like the film really crosses a line. It also doesn't help that the entire film has been setting up Nicole Brown Simpson as someone to blame, that she's the reason why she was murdered. From the writing to the acting to the way the film is shot, this is a complete trash fire of a movie. So what made your list? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to support the channel even more, get some awesome perks as well as getting your name in the opening credits, become a Patreon today. Link is down in the description below. Thank you so much for coming by, and I'll see you guys on the next video.